We make decisions, like big decisions on a monthly basis that then set the direction for that particular person to own that particular channel for the next 30 days. So that also ties back into that North Star vision piece is if they have the core values and they know the direction that we decided to go for that channel that they own on a day to day, but they're getting direction, course correction. I want to go a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. We're doing that on a monthly basis. That sets the tone and the direction for how they're going to manage and own that channel going forward. And that is something that I've found has dramatically accelerated growth. It increases employee happiness and success because then they get to own it on the day to day. They don't feel like they're being micromanaged. They're being monthly managed. That's not a big deal at all. As long as you trust them, of course, you have to hire great people, but that's in a gist. And then this actually in a part of the requirement is if they have recommended changes, they have to present it in a 131 proposal within that 20 minutes. So they might spend the first 15 saying, here's the data. In the last 5 minutes, here's my 131 proposal based on what I've learned or what's changed in the last month. And then we make a decision.
Dick Polipnick, thanks so much for joining me today on RevOps Champions podcast. It's good to have you here.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon.
I forget now how long we've known each other. I think, for at least for me, from the very first time we met, I knew that at some point, whether it was once or multiple times, we would have the opportunity to work together in one way or another. So I was very pleased last year when that actually finally did happen in a more official way, in your role as VP of marketing at GoRout, which of course is a very exciting business that we're very happy to be a part of supporting. You have a rich history of innovation and marketing and business strategy. I know you've shared with me in the past that revenue operations or RevOps as we call it is something that you're very passionate about. But I'd like to just sort of dig into and share some of your experiences with our audience, in the hopes that there are some of the things that you've learned, like many of us have learned who've been in business for a while, where we can sort of maybe help our audience short circuit and not make some of the mistakes that every business leader makes at some point. So to dive in, so thinking back to some of your previous roles, what are the elements from your perspective that separated teams that have scaled more efficiently than the ones who didn't?
That's a great question. I'm a big believer that the tone of an organization starts at the top and it ripples throughout the organization, and setting the vision and having that true North Star for every single person on the company. And if leadership gets hit by a bus, that they have not only set that goal and that vision, but they've communicated it. So it's a twofold, setting it and communicating it. Because you can set it in an internal leadership meeting, on a quarterly meeting, and if that never gets communicated to everyone in the organization, it's worthless, right? You might be making decisions on the day-to-day of leaders making decisions of where they're going to allocate budget or who they're going to hire for next. But if that's not communicated at the deepest levels of the organization, in the day-to-day, to me, that's what is the big differentiator of scalability with companies. Because you can have a company with the same funding, the same talent, the same headcount, the same market opportunities. And the company that's going to win at the end is painting that crystal clear vision and doing a good job of communicating it. And I keep saying the communication thing because I'm a big fan of radical candor. Which is something that's a tool that I've brought with me in my toolbox from company to company to company. And it's amazing how quickly that gets picked up. And you either love it or you absolutely hate it, despise it, because I call it my anti-Minnesota nice policy, because otherwise everybody beats around the bush and they don't get to the core of the issue. So I almost use that as an excuse and say, hey, first I introduce it in my first day. I send an email intro for every company I join, say, my name's Dick Polipnick. I like hiking and blah, 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 jujitsu, et cetera, et cetera. But hey, by the way, watch this quick video, this TED talk about radical candor. This is how I prefer to be communicated with. and this is how I communicate. So if I come off as confrontational or straight to the point, or maybe even abrasive sometimes, that's why I'm communicating this way. And then when you preface that, I always preface it with, every time I communicate that, hey, radical candor, and then I continue on with the sentence, then people know to take their defenses down, not to take it so seriously. I'm not attacking them. I'm attacking a problem that we are both involved with and trying to solve. So that's a tool in the communication tool belt, but I'm tangenting right now. But to get back to your answer, painting a clear vision and then communicating that vision is by far the answer.
Which makes a lot of sense, because it doesn't matter, what operating system, a business uses, they'll have some form of vision at the top as kind of the first step. Creating the vision is one thing, but then that continuous communication to bring the team along is such a critical thing, and it's a lot more difficult than a lot of people who start businesses realize. The challenges and the strengths that all types of leaders have. Some leaders have an innate ability to be good communicators, and others don't. And the ones who don't, obviously, need to find others, partners that they can bring in to make sure that the communication does take place. I was fortunate enough to meet Kim Scott a few weeks ago, and I'm not sure if you've read her latest book, which is an extension of Radical Candor, which is now
Haven't yet.
Radical Respect. I guess she's doing this speaking tour where she's, again, but I found it, I learned more from her in a few hours than, I'd have to read the book many times. I was just really grateful that I had the opportunity to actually see her explain it exactly. And then, of course, her little 2x2 graphic makes it so much easier to then put into practice.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. It's such a critical thing. And, you talked about Minnesota, and, and I think she's actually from Minnesota originally, but then she spent a lot of time on the East Coast, and then she spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley and a lot of time in the South. And she realized that by using the tools that she's created, it doesn't really matter where you are. You can actually break through those cultural norms, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously realize that you have to adapt to the local culture. But again, by being direct, to your point, and just saying, look, this is how I like to communicate, and this is how I'm going to give you feedback, and well, this is how we give feedback anyway. So yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's a really good tool to essentially do what you were saying, which is, how do you make sure you're communicating in real time with people when they're straying from your vision or your core values, which I'm guessing is kind of one of the next things that as part of that process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And during my time at Online Growth Systems, which is a B2B software agency that I owned for 6 years, sold that to another company that you and I know of. They were doing a roll-up strategy, buying a bunch of smaller agencies. We were one of those acquisitions. Worked there for a year. Within 30 days of working there, got promoted from being the number 3 person in the company, the number 2 person in the entire umbrella. So scaling multiple businesses, multiple agencies, that entire holdco. So learned a lot, because not only did I have to work on managing the direct team that was with me in Minnetonka, but also all of the other agencies that we owned around the United States, because we really set the tone as the parent organization and had shared resources, and we were consolidating and doing a roll-up play. And one of the big things that I learned during Online Growth Systems as we were scaling that business is, like, to what you just alluded to, which is core values being a close secondary piece of painting that vision and having that North Star. But then on the day to day, it's hard for a customer success representative to ask themselves, is this decision that I'm going to make, or how am I going to interact with this customer who might be approaching me frustrated? Out of the things that I could say, or the solutions I could provide for this customer, that North Star sometimes isn't enough to make that answer clear. That's where the core values come into play. And I know it's, to a lot of folks who haven't been a part of a healthy core value organization, they think it's just rah, fluffy. It's something that you set when you start a company and you create the business plan, or you maybe talk about it once a year, and it's sitting on a plaque somewhere in the office, or it's sitting on some BTO spreadsheet in your Google Drive, and you never talk about it again. Versus healthy companies that are scaling, they actually lean on those core values as the day-to-day decision-making matrices, right? So they actually say, during Online Growth Systems, radical candor was so important to me that it became one of our 5 core values. And what I would do is, every quarter, when we would have a quarterly team meeting, I would ask every person on the team, and I would always go from the veteran to the newest person that might have just been hired 2 weeks ago because they probably haven't had a chance to memorize it yet. But I would buy them coffee only if they could recite all five of our core values word for word perfectly. And you learned real quick because a little $5 coffee is a big motivator at 7 a.m. for an all day 12-hour offsite, company offsite, right? Which is kind of fun too, because it's not that big of stakes, right? But
Right.
it works. Food works a lot. So the veterans would do it, and then it would give a chance for the newer folks to hear it, 5, 6 times before it got to them. And by the second quarter, every single person always had it memorized by their second quarterly meeting, every single core value. And by having it just memorized, then those folks, whether I'm on vacation or I get hit by a bus, they can continue to run the organization on a day-to-day micro decision and a macro decision on how does this feed into our company vision? Because now you've got 5 core values that you can lean on when that customer success representative is having, a decision to make when they're confronting with a customer and saying, how can I solve this problem? Now they've got 5 additional filters or 6 or how many core values you have. They
Right.
can run it through those filters and say, okay, I'm going to practice core value A with this customer. I'm going to provide, customer first, customer's never wrong, whatever that core value is for you. And now that presents out of your 5 potential solutions that you could do for that customer. It really helps you isolate which one you should be doing. And you don't need to run it by your manager. You don't need to run it by, you don't need to consult the SOP, the standard operating procedure document to realize what you should do. You just simply have to ask yourself, how does this match my core values at the company? And then you go forward and make that decision.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we just did a series of sort of recap episodes of what we learned from our podcast guests last year, and there's no doubt that the overwhelming thing came down to, so what how we summarize it was called leadership and culture, which essentially is exactly, without leadership and culture being at the forefront, you cannot really create an effective vision or core values, or make sure that those important things are communicated on a regular basis. Not surprising, so again, thanks for validating that. So assuming that you have that in place, so you have good leadership who've created a good vision and they're really good at communicating it, and they're living their core values. In other words, they're hiring, firing, motivating, making big and small decisions based on their core values. What would you say is the next thing that you've seen, or in your experience, is that separates companies that are able to scale more effectively than their competitors?
It's going to be the framework or the methodology that you're following. I know you've had a bunch of episodes in the past, so we don't have to dive too deep into this, but whether you're practicing the Rockefeller habits, the scaling up methodology, or you're doing entrepreneurial operating system, or your dev team is practicing Scrum, or you're using Kanban boards, all of those frameworks are how you structure the bones of the organization. And then you hire around that. You build your day around that. I'm very type A. So my calendar is on the 15-minute increment booked out, every minute accounted for, because that's just how my brain operates. If I have a blank calendar, which is sometimes I do intentionally, because I need to spend an offsite walking in the woods thinking about this problem that I can't just solve in 15 minutes. This is a major company altering decision. And sometimes I'd like to get outside and be with nature and just think, right? And
Yeah.
think about my options and digest. But getting back to it, the structure of the organization of which you model after your ideal model, whatever suits you, whatever you might have experience in. And of course, there's watered down version of those, right? Like even us, I am an EOS huge hyper fan, right? So I've actually brought that methodology with me at every single company as well, as much as I can. And the organization kind of has to tailor it to them, because a weekly L10 might not always make sense for you at 90 minutes. At a lot of the startups that I've worked at that I've helped scale, a 60-minute weekly L10 is all you need. Otherwise, you're twiddling your thumbs for another 30 minutes and then it's unnecessary, right? Quarterlies, having an issues list, having a organizational chart, right? Having that be transparent throughout the organization.
Hmm.
A lot of those things, I would say that's like the third thing on my list of what separates the companies that either stagnate or die compared to the companies that hyperscale or really outpace their competitors. That's happened across the board. And my background is mostly in B2B software, scaling those businesses, whether it be through my 7 years in agency or Gym Desk, which is a company I helped scale, or currently through GoRout, where I'm at now. And of course, all the entire list of companies that I worked at through the agency, or agencies, I should say. That is a big thing that I've noticed with of the all companies I've been a part of and the companies we've helped serve.
The reason I was asking this is because we we've had, a lot of our guests, and you're no exception, have started off by saying, like, trying to create the parallels between, like, an operating system like EOS, which we run on EOS too, and
Mhm.
a large proportion of our clients run on EOS, especially the ones in Minnesota. But it's, EOS is growing like crazy everywhere.
Yeah.
I was just speaking to our implementer last week because we have our quarterly planning coming up, and they were just at, they're a big sort of one of their annual offsites, and he was telling me how there are 850 EOS implementers now, globally,
Wow.
which is
Wow.
crazy to think, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I remember when there was like 20.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and 12 of them were in Minnesota. But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really really impressive. But and I've seen the parallels, but it's so interesting. I always want to know more when other people are talking about the parallels between, and you were just talking about frameworks, right? And we had an episode, I think you might have seen it, from Sangram Vajre, who, again, he's huge on frameworks and models and processes and what
Mhm.
have you. And when you put the two side by side, like, whether it's scaling up or EOS, or you name the operating system, but then you put, RevOps, which is just another framework or model, or GTM, which is becoming another model that businesses are using, and then you can argue whether does RevOps fit within GTM and who's responsible and whatever. But the point, I think your point, is that you have to have a framework. So once you have the vision and the leadership and the culture and all that piece figured out, which is the foundation, then you need to move on to, I mean, like in scaling up, you would that would also cover your strategy, right? What is your strategy to reach your North Star? But then when it comes to executing, how do you execute and scale effectively? And that's through using frameworks and processes. So in RevOps, we talk about the four pillars of RevOps as people, process, data, and technology, right? And you can give those different names, but those are the names that we use.
Yeah.
And if you think in, whether it's scaling up or EOS or whatever, it's always a version of the same thing, right? It's vision, people, data, systems, they all essentially the same thing. And it's really interesting to see how they connect, and why they connect.
Mhm.
And because, again, the next question I would ask you, and I'm just going to tell you what the answer is, because I know you're going to say it, and I know it's either going to be data or technology. So you have the vision and leadership and communication and frameworks in place, which from our perspective includes process. The next ingredients to be successful is having access to good, reliable, accurate, real-time data, right? Or, again, depending on the system you're using, you might call them OKRs or KPIs or metrics or whatever, but we call it data.
Mhm.
And then once you have that, then you say, okay, well, now how do we make all this move better, faster? And I know that you're passionate about technology, and you have a lot of, you work a lot, and you have a lot of experience in SaaS, which ultimately is technology. So again, if you when you put those four components together, how do you think about, or how would you describe an example of a business where they've had those components in place and they've been so much more effective at scaling than, let's say, another business who seemingly had the same headcount, access to the same funding, everything seemed equal, but one company was scaling and the other one wasn't.
Yeah, I'll use GoRout, the company I'm working at right now, as the example. So I'll add some context for the listeners. We are a coach to player communication company. So what that means is we make smartwatches for sports teams. So a coach will have a tablet, our tablet, in a dugout, let's say for softball or baseball, or on the sidelines, if you're a football coach, they'll select the pitch that they want thrown. A watch is on the wrists of the catcher or the pitcher. In a lot of cases, it'll vibrate. They'll look down and they'll see, okay, I'm throwing an inside fastball, right? Now the pitcher, the catcher, funny how there's parallels here for the game. It's just like in companies, you want to have clear communication, radical candor. You're boom, boom. This is what I want you to execute on, right? And you have a system, the GoRout system to do that. Technology. It's funny how this is all feeding in. In fact, now we've got a crazy data component that's coming out. We're layering AI on top of it. Now you can look at your post-game data report to make better decisions going forward, saying this pitcher on my team or on the bench is very, very good at fastballs. Every time I communicate to them to throw a fastball, you look at it, compare that piece of data point. We're calling it intent data versus result data. Now you can look at the cameras, you can look at your heat mapping system and actually compare apples to apples. You told this pitcher to throw X. Did they throw X or did they throw Y? And now you can have comparison tables. You can have success ratios for per pitcher, per inning, per pitch, which is fascinating because now, and then you can start using AI to say, hey, whenever you're in this type of a situation in a game, you should use this pitcher and use this call, right? So it's amazing how technology and data, to your point, is influencing sports in the decision making. And now coaches are being flooded with technology and data today more than they have in the last 100 years combined. It's unreal. So stepping back, that was some color on what GoRout does. So essentially, coach to player smartwatches. And one of the reasons that we are outscaling the other products in the category is because we have those things set up. We use EOS. We have a great CEO who sets a clear company vision at North Star. We have a leadership team that then takes that vision, communicates it to everyone on the team, whether you're a customer support representative or you're the growth marketer on the growth team, right? Every single person in our organization knows our core values. They know our North Star. They understand even our value propositions of what makes us different from our key differentiators, right? That's another verbiage that can be translated into a dozen other ways to call it, but what makes us unique compared to the competitor? In fact, right now, we're talking about spinning up comparison landing pages to educate the consumer, educate our coaches and saying, here's when you should pick the GoRoute system, but then being candid and saying, here's when you should pick the other guy. They are better than us in situations X, Y, and Z. But of course, we like to position ourselves as in cases A through everything up until then, you should probably go with us because we really do truly believe that we are the better system. The data proves it, our company growth proving it, and the word of mouth is insane. It's something that's kind of funny is as much of a data and a technology person as I am, my favorite growth strategy is word of mouth, which is the hardest to track. It's the hardest to measure. It's the hardest to actually get going because that means you have to be hitting 100% accuracy on so many different categories. You have to have an amazing product. You have to have near perfect customer retention, right? In fact, probably like anti-churn, right? Where your growth is outpacing your net negative churn, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And your referrals are just coming out like crazy, right? Maybe you even have a system built in place for an incentive program to be able to facilitate that. But even if you don't have something, your customers are so excited about your product that they're just telling all of their friends in the industry because everybody knows everybody in everybody's industry, right? They all go to the conferences, they all go to the coaching clinics, they all are, whatever business you're in. It might be a Reddit thread, right? Or a forum somewhere, or an email newsletter, right? Or a Slack channel, even a public community Slack channel. And good tools spread like wildfire. And not only is that good product, that's good customer service, that's good pricing, that is priced appropriately for your target customers. So you just have to be, your scorecard of business has to be almost A's across the board to get that word of mouth really flying, or you're solving an extremely painful problem that hasn't been solved yet. And then you can have some excuses where you might be some B's and C's elsewhere, but you're the only option in the market. Right. So you are the only solution. So that works too.
No, that's really good. And you kind of reminded me as you were talking there too. So you were talking about essentially you were talking about net revenue retention, NRR, which again is more of a this kind of leads to my question. There are so many things that come from business efficiency that come from the SaaS world right? And even a lot of the terms like RevOps itself, for example, came from SaaS. A lot of metrics, like in SaaS, one of the ultimate metrics is LTV, right? Your lifetime value of a customer. Another one is CAC. Now, and I know that there are other industries that use some of these metrics, but typically, every industry has its own set of metrics. A question for you, so because you know a lot about SaaS, but you've also worked a lot in professional services, and you've worked a lot for businesses in other industries. What learnings would you say from other industries can learn from what SaaS has created? Because if you think about because SaaS can teach us a lot in how to move more quickly, effectively, and be really really good at staying connected to the customer, which ultimately that's what drives business, right? Are there any things that you've seen in SaaS that you wonder why other industries don't use those same metrics or lessons?
I'm almost a stickler and say I think that almost every metric should be used by every industry on the growth side, because to your point, software is just optimized to be, it's built for speed and fast decision making and efficient scaling, right? Those are all great things that every business wants to do, whether they're in insurance sales or they're doing manufacturing or they're in e-commerce, whatever that looks like. I know a lot of your listeners are in manufacturing. So I'll use one of my favorite examples is Kanban, which is Japanese for billboard. It was coined by Toyota Corporation. They had essentially a big billboard or a big sign in their factory that would post all of their metrics, all of the data points of how many cars are they currently working on? Where are they in the manufacturing process? Are they in upholstery? Are they in tire checks? Are they in fabrication? Whatever that looks like. And the entire company, every single worker on the factory floor could look up at this billboard inside the factory and know exactly, without having to actually walk through the factory floor, they knew exactly where, maybe there was a slowdown or where there was extra capacity to maybe, switch other people into different departments to try to catch up. So everyone had 100% transparency, with another communication thing, into where the business was at on that exact moment in time. So real time data, communication down to the every level layer of the company. Those are the folks that coined the term Kanban. That gets
Mhm.
translated into a billion other interpretations. One of my favorites is something I like, a tool called Trello, which is owned by Atlassian. It's essentially a bunch of columns for tasks. You go left to right. Mirror, I kind of hybrid a little bit of Scrum, where it says, there's a backlog to do, doing. I have an awaiting approval process. That's where it's getting QA checked, or maybe you're looping in another department that has, buy-in on this particular thing that you're trying to ship. And then you
Mhm.
have complete. And every quarter we go through that list as a team. This is done at the team level, not at the higher, leadership levels. Then you can go through that list, and this is also like a retrospective of, wow, we got done 400 tasks or tickets or shipped 400 products this quarter. What did we learn? What can we do better? Things like that. So having that Kanban, which
Mhm.
is whatever that billboard looks like in manufacturing. Another great story is, and I'm gonna probably mess up these names or these dates or anything like that, but the premise still remains. I'm notorious for adding color. But essentially, it was Andrew Carnegie had hired, it was the guy who was the first person to ever have a salary of $1 million in history. It was Charles Schwab, I think, if that sounds right. Charles Schwab was hired by Andrew Carnegie to essentially take one of his steel plants and say, "This is the worst steel plant in my portfolio. Something's wrong. It should be doing a lot better, and they're just behind on production." And Charles Schwab said, "Pay me $1 million a year. I'll go in and I'll make it your best factory in your entire industry." And he
Mhm.
said, "Okay, let's see you do it." So he went in and he took a big piece of chalk, and they had two shifts. They had a day shift and they had a night shift. And on the floor on the factory floor, he wrote a big number, and he wrote like 5 for representing. That's how many shipments of steel the night shift had done that night. So then when the morning shift workers came in, they all saw this big 5, and then a little bit of friendly competitive rivalry kicked in. And now the day shift, they erased it and they wrote 6. So then when the night shift came in, they saw, oh, okay, day shift is trying to show that they're faster and more efficient than us, right? And then it created this beautiful chemistry between the day shift and the night shift where it became this competition of who could ship out other things. Now you've got ideas that are being shared. You've got leadership being able to take, here's what the night shift did. We actually switched this part of the department or the factory floor around because it's faster. Lean comes from manufacturing, right? Six Sigma, I think, is another one. So then that Kanban is getting applied there. You're having transparency into data and metrics on the manufacturing floor. That's one of my favorite stories of a use case where that was actually applied very simply with a single
Yeah.
number.
Which again is it's I like the way you talked about the Kanban, and in fact you mentioned Trello. We actually use Trello to manage our podcast production, right?
Oh,
So
great.
we work with a podcast production partner, and they only work on one podcast episode at a time, but
Mhm,
the Trello board that we have in conjunction with them has I think seven columns, and we
mhm.
move episodes from one to the next, and so we know where the episodes are and they know which one they're working on, or what stage of the episode, creating snippets or whatever. And I know we're both big HubSpot fans. The HubSpot deals board is very much the same. So whether it's leaders or at least a CRO or a sales leader, I mean, that's the first thing they look at every morning is their deals board, which is laid out in the same way. It's how many deals do we have in the pipeline? How many contracts do we have out? How many, what deals have we won or lost? And then you can kind of gain more information from there. But what I like about where you went with that Carnegie story was how you can use those things then also to impact behavior,
Mhm.
to increase. Ultimately it is productivity, but it's in a healthy way, right? And I'm sure there's probably a point where maybe it's not healthy or sustainable, but that's where a good leader will be able to judge. Okay, if these guys get up to doing, you started with 5 and then 6, and then maybe by the time they get to 10 or 11, there's like, okay, we need to change something here because these people are going to burn out, and then we're going to be bound down to 0 or 1, which is not going to be healthy. But the point is you have data, and then you have mechanisms that impact the right type of behavior, and this is always something that a lot of us as leaders have learned the hard way, which is you sometimes do things which you think are incenting the right behavior, but in fact it incents the wrong behavior, and then you learn the lesson, and then you adjust, and then you try something else. But like the term we use a lot around here is you're either winning or learning.
I like that.
I mean, it's essentially a data company. Ultimately, it's a data company that uses technology to obviously provide that data to GoRout customers. And as you were talking about it earlier, I was kind of thinking it's almost like GoRout has brought the whole Moneyball concept to high school teams in multiple sports, right? And we all know how, I mean, those of us who have seen Moneyball, and most of us who've seen it have probably watched it multiple times, because it's just such a great movie where you can take a perceived to be a substandard team, but
Mhm.
then outperform the most expensive teams and players in the league, just by looking at the data and going, well, you know what? If we just get a few more guys who can pitch this thing or hit this ball, we don't need more expensive people. We just need people who can do the things where we have gaps, right?
Exactly.
And the fact that you've made it accessible to essentially high school teams and across all kinds of sports. And I often struggle with sports because not having grown up in the US, I didn't grow up with football and basketball and baseball and all these things, but I've learned a lot, being next to the Twins stadium here in Minneapolis. I do enjoy going a few times, every summer, and watching the games, and I guess part of that appreciation is probably comes from things like Moneyball, but the data component of the game. And I know, we, Daniel on our team who works with GoRout is a total, baseball geek. I mean, I think what he would really like to do is be a baseball catcher. So when he's working on go route things, and it's specific to, a catcher and that communication with the pitcher, I mean, that is like his ultimate dream. And then of course also being very into the data and technology that can continuously make improvements, has been a very cool thing to watch, as he's worked with the GoRout team. So
Well, before we keep
yeah,
going, I'd love to tie in some of those threads together.
yeah,
So Dynamico is working with GoRout, and one of the most recent features that we launched, an internal facing tool with Dynamico, actually feeds into a lot of what I've talked about so far. So having that transparent data company wide and then baking it into our technology, baking that into our operating system. We have access to data that nobody else in the industry has access to. A lot of our competitors are using radio frequencies, or they're using other technology mediums to communicate that messaging from coach to player. We use a cellular network. What that enables us to do is we can then go to a cloud provider and store interesting data, so we can see trends across the industry. So we can see how many plays are being sent by new customers. That feeds into our customer success team. So we can say, hey, this new customer, they're in season. We have an in season and off season calendar. Those metrics look very, very different. Obviously, if it's winter and you're a fall team, you're not going to be throwing anything, right? You're not calling any plays. So what we look at is, if it's a first year customer, how we make sure that they're on track for renewal is, are they in their first 2 weeks of the season? Are they throwing X number of pitches? Are they calling this amount of plays with the system? And if the answer is no, that flags a ticket inside of our HubSpot environment for our customer success representative to reach out to that coaching team and say, hey, based on the data we can see, it looks like we consider you, and this is, we actually use radical candor. We tell them, we say, based on our information, it looks like you're off pace. And we actually tell them that they're off pace. To a coach, that's a huge red flag, right? Nobody wants to be off pace, right? Because that tells them that their competitors are practicing more than them, or using the system faster than that. So then what we've seen is within 24 hours of getting that email, their usage skyrockets. Which is great, because
which
at this
is
point,
awesome. Yeah,
oh, that's exactly what you want. Now the statistical odds of that customer staying as another customer, renewing their contract for another year, using the system, making it sticky, baking it into their daily workflow, is infinitely higher, right? Versus the system
sure.
sitting in the locker room collecting dust, right? They're going to cancel the contract. You did all that work, customer acquisition for nothing, right? So
Yeah.
now we can take that data, we provide it transparently to our company, baked into our systems. We can automate an email. So now the customer success representative only has to get involved if there's a question or a reply. So we can do this at scale for thousands and thousands of teams with one customer success representative.
Hmm.
So this ties into the big AI trend that's going on right now, is that we're able to leverage technology and data to scale teams to, tens and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue with a tiny, tiny team, because data and systems and technology and AI especially is enabling companies to scale so much higher. So your revenue per employee, I think Microsoft just came out in the last quarter with, they had their highest revenue per employee ever in company history, which is incredible, right? And a lot of that has to do with AI playing a big, big factor. But that's a project that we worked on with Dynamico. It feeds into a lot of what we talked about: communication, radical candor, building in data and systems and operating systems. So that was just I thought I wanted to just plug that in there as a beautiful marriage of a lot of things we've been talking about.
I really like that example because, ultimately the GoRoute customers they're not investing in GoRoute because it's a nice to have. They're investing in GoRoute because it's going to make them better as a team. So if you can give them that, and because radical candor is all about helpful feedback, right?
Yes.
So this is what we're learning from the data, which again, if you don't have access to a way to collect the data, then you're not going to be learning anything. And if you're not sharing that with them, then you're essentially doing them a disservice, right? Because what they're paying for is to make more data driven decisions. Ultimately, I really like the way you wrap that all up, and because it makes total sense. And I think it does get into a lot of the cultural challenges I think that a lot of businesses run into. And you talked about Minnesota Nice earlier, and that's just one example of a culture which is different to the East Coast or the West Coast of the US, and then of course very different to other cultures where I've lived and traveled in Europe or Asia. But either way, you have to be very clear about what it is that's providing value to your customer. And if you're not communicating every data point that essentially is why the customer invested in your product or your service or your business, then you're doing yourself a disservice. But I think to your point, it helps if you build that into your core values, for example, and or your culture, that this is why we do what we do. So when we learn something that is helpful to a customer, you need to share it with them. Otherwise, we're not fulfilling our mission, essentially, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So I
Or
think
you're
that
not
was
practicing your core value, right?
yeah, exactly. I think there's a really good example. Dick, I think just one other question I'd like to get into, which so a lot of people who listen to the RevOps Champions podcast are considering implementing new technology, or they've maybe recently, or maybe the last time they implemented technology it didn't go so well, but they're at some sort of decision point about implementing technology, which right now might be AI related, might not be. But what would you say, what goes into your sort of decision making process to when you're considering implementing technology within an organization? How long, and then yeah, so what goes into your decision process, and I guess is one of those things how long it's going to take for the team who's going to be using that technology to adopt the technology?
There's layers to that as well, because you could have leadership, or you could have one department or one particular person who, or one role in the company adopted technology. I'm a big fan of phased rollouts because it increases adoption, it increases success,
Hmm.
and candidly, it makes the timeline a lot easier, right?
Right.
So if it's a program or a piece of technology that is multi-department or multi-role facing, it has capabilities to affect the organization, like HubSpot,
Hmm.
like Trello is another option, or an example, I should say. I look at cost is always a big factor, right? Like, does it fit into your budget? Yes or no? And a lot of times with the new technology, your budget for the year might have already been allocated and accounted for. But a new piece of technology, we're dealing with this right now at GoRout. New piece of technology comes onto the market. It shows promising validation at first. It's starting to get some likes. I've done some due diligence as a leader, as a RevOps leader at GoRout, and saying, what other companies that are obviously not, nobody in our industry is using it, but there's parallels to it, similar use cases. What are the results that those folks have been getting? And do I believe that if we do this correctly and it fits our budget, it fits our timeline, it fits our needs, do I think we can replicate that success and or make it even more successful? If the answer is no, wait out to do it, right? Or we wait till the product matures or the technology is better or whatever that looks like. And I've put things on not now, but later on that in that bucket plenty of times in my career. Like right now, AI is changing the way we do business. And I'm in the camp that I think it's going to become commoditized in the next 12 months. So right now, the feature for feature comparison that's winning customers in the marketplace is very quickly going to disappear, because I think it's going to be a race to the bottom. It's going to become oil, where who can make it faster and cheaper.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to win customers, the Amazon model, faster, cheaper, better, right? So those differentiators are going to only last for a couple more months. Does that mean you should wait till it's become commoditized? Absolutely not. Why would you miss out on the next 12 months of hyper growth, especially when it's harder for your competitors to adopt something? In my opinion, that's a reason to adopt it faster. Do
Yeah.
it now versus waiting till it's dirt cheap, because not only is it going to be dirt cheap for you, it's going to be dirt cheap for everybody in your industry, right? And now everybody, all your competitors are using AI, and it's going to be who can use it the most creatively and blah, blah, blah. And then the problem changes a lot and the value proposition changes a lot. So after all those obvious things, what I like to do is create a 1-3-1, which I originally pulled from the toolbox of Dan Martell, and he pulled it from somebody else's toolbox. I can't remember who. But essentially, we call it the 1-3-1 rule, or which produces something called a 1-3-1 proposal, which is something that I communicate with everyone in my organization. I prepare these for the leadership team. I prepare these for my CEO, everyone who reports up to me. When they are asking me to make a decision, they do it in a 1-3-1 proposal. So what it does is you have to isolate it down to one problem, because that's number one. It sounds obvious, it's not. Because sometimes people will come and say, they'll speak about 6 different problems, and you go, whoa, 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 put this on pause. You're talking about 6 different things. Those 6 different things could have 6 different solutions on 6 different timelines with 6 different budgets. I need you to organize this into one single problem. What is the problem? Isolate it. Then I want you to provide me 3 options. Oftentimes, those don't have to be 3 different pieces of technology or 3 different methodologies or 3 different people that you could hire. A lot of the times, one of those 3 options could be status quo, staying with what you already have. The option could be, sometimes the best decision is to do nothing, right? Is to
Mhm.
keep the course. So that's another thing. Like, if we're talking about introducing a new piece of technology, a lot of the times I see that as one of my 3 options is, or maybe sometimes it'll be a fourth, right?
Yeah.
Where you go, okay, option 1, stay with the status quo. Here are the benefits. Here are the pros and the cons. Option 2, go with technology A, more expensive, longer to implement, but pros are it could have a higher ROI, and this could translate into multiple departments, right? This is a very common example. Option 3, cheaper, faster. We can implement it within 6 days, but it's only going to work for the marketing team or the customer support team or the dev team, right? So it won't be multi-department, and we can't scale it.
Mhm.
Maybe it'll be something we have to switch providers in 6 months because it's built for companies that are below 10 million in revenue or whatever that looks like, right?
Mhm.
And then so that's the 1-3-1, one isolated problem, 3 potential options, and then you have to have one recommendation. And this is where it introduces another tool in the toolbox I like to use, which is the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule. And 80% of the time, I go with the one recommendation from my team member. 20% of the time, I'll go with one of the other 2 options. Oh, and then the one recommendation has to be one of those 3 options. You can't just make up a fourth in your recommendation. In rare, rare, rare occasions, you can do a hybrid of those 3 options where you say, I think we should do option C for the next 6 months because we're tight on timeline and budget. But my recommendation is we go with option C with the intent of switching to plan B 6 months from now, because we'll have more budget, we'll have more resources, and we need to scale. Right. So that's an example of a rare case where you'll have a hybrid in your one recommendation. But
Interesting.
um, yeah,
Very
1-3-1,
cool.
great tool in the toolbox to bring when you're considering adopting a new piece of technology. 80-20 rule. If your team member, what this does is it forces your team members to do research, actually think about the options, get data collected. And a lot of the times, this actually happens to me all the time, where I ask a team member to say, hey, we're trying to solve this problem. There's so many different solutions. I say, okay, send me a 1-3-1 on it by end of week. And a lot of times I'll get a Slack message that says, hey, as I was preparing the 1-3-1, the answer became extremely obvious and clear to me. I'm going to go with this. And they solve their own problem. So it enables, that also feeds into scalability, is that your team members can scale without always escalating things to leadership or management, or they're the higher up the food chain. Right. So it allows individuals to be a lot more independent. Of course, that has to come with a little bit of organizational structure where, like, people on my team, they don't have to get approval from me on decisions that are up to X dollars or up to X
Yeah.
amount of hours, right? They have autonomy to make those decisions without asking, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that has to
Yeah.
be built
Which is
in.
another layer which is important. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, we use another tool, but I'm going to check out the 1-3-1. We use Dan Sullivan's impact filter, which actually is something that he originally created for the visionary or the CEO or the leader to use first before they go and give it to the team and say, oh, go and do this. They have to sell them. You have to sell yourself on it first, right?
Mhm.
So this is more for people who have ideas, like which often is entrepreneurs, right? But we also know that entrepreneurial ideas can be very damaging to a scaling business if they're not properly framed and presented. Anyway, but I'm going to check out the 1-3-1. The other tool that I know, or a tool or framework that you've mentioned to me in the past is M3Ds. Is that related?
Yeah. So M3Ds that's something that I coined. It's a tool that I really refined at a company called Gymdesk. That was the organization I was at before GoRout. So what Gymdesk was, or is it's essentially software for gym owners, whether that's jujitsu studio or a yoga studio or a lifting facility. Those fitness businesses need to run on a piece of software, right? And it's called vertical software. So it can do everything from member management to payment integrations to class schedules, right? The whole thing. And in fact, even there's like key fob authentication. So if your membership's
Mhm.
active, you can scan your card, get into the building. It's 24-hour access, right? So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
the entire suite, a single place where you can essentially run your entire fitness business all under one roof for a
Right.
crazy great price too. So it was extremely great product market fit. We had a great strategy. Our key differentiators were something that the 800-pound gorillas in the industry had been ignoring because they had been the incumbent. They were several $billion in revenue and didn't need to change. So we came into the market. We made something that was better, faster, more affordable, priced appropriately, right? All under one roof, and it exploded. We grew extremely fast, and with that hyper growth, you have to have systems built in to facilitate that kind of growth. There's two opposites here. In scenario A, you're growing so fast that you say, I don't have time to look at the data. Well, then you might be going a completely wrong direction, or you might be lighting piles of cash on fire because you're dumping money into a growth channel that's not providing the return on investment that it used to 6 months ago. So you're lighting this pile of money on fire because you don't have time to look at the data, right? You're growing too fast. Things are going great. Why do you care? It's working. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
Scenario B is where you're too attentive to that and you can get lost in the sauce. You're looking at the data every single day for things that you don't need to look at every day. Like to your point, if you're a VP of sales, you want to be looking at the HubSpot sales pipeline every morning when you come into work because you want to see what deals are being held up, what stage in my pipeline are things being slow, do we need top of marketing, or top line sales to get going, or are we having struggle with closing these deals on the contract sent column, right? Where you can get too attentive is now you're looking at the macro data or the micro data every single day, and it's not changing. It's within a tiny variable, and you're wasting time. So those are the two extremes. So I developed this system called monthly data deep dives, and we call them M3Ds for fun. What that is we actually have it extremely disciplined. Every single team member, and this comes into the organizational chart tool we've talked about. This comes into the clear and transparent communication piece and enabling people within our organization to have leadership and ownership over particular parts of the business, right? You can make decisions up to X dollars. You can own your own calendar. I'm not micromanaging your day to day. So what I like to do is like on my marketing team, for example, every single person on my marketing team owns channels. So person X owns channels A, B, and C, et cetera, et cetera. And they are responsible for how many leads is that channel getting? Is it providing a positive return on investment? What are you spending on that? Your budget is 10,000 a month. Are you spending 6,000 this month because it's off season or it's March, like we're currently recording this, and everybody's on spring break, and every coach and administrator on the planet is on spring vacation, and we're just not going to get as much decision making happening right now because everybody's on spring break, right? Same thing with like Christmas time. Everybody's on Christmas break, especially schools, which are the bulk majority of our customers. They're not in office. Summer times too, right? So they have the ability to adjust those dials without always consulting me on the day to day. But what that means is, notice I said they're day to day. They have totally autonomy to do that. But we set the pace, the tone, the direction, just like we were talking about earlier, on the channels. So what we do is once a month, every person on my team has 20 minutes to present a pre-prepared proposal. They can't just wing it and pull up a dashboard and be interpreting the data in real time. So what they do is they have 20 minutes to go through, and every guy does it different. Every person does it different because they might be showing HubSpot dashboards that they created from the reports. They might be showing a spreadsheet from data they manually type in each month to prepare for this. They might be showing me a PowerPoint presentation of what that looks like. In fact, it might be different from each person from month to month. They might do a spreadsheet one month or a proposal the next month. And oftentimes they have 20 minutes to show me the data at the micro level, right? The data deep dive. We're doing the deep dive once a month. You're not doing it more often than that because you don't need to. And you're doing it monthly because if you don't do it that often, you could go 60 days and you could have, for the last 40, you were lighting a pile of money on fire, right? So I found this to be like the sweet spot for the stage of company that's, between 0 and 50 million in revenue, this is a really great cadence where you're doing it often enough to make great decisions, but you're not getting lost in the sauce, right? So 20 minutes, proposal, looking at showing me the data. In fact, we invite everybody onto these calls. So the whole company is invited, but it's mandatory for that particular team department. Everyone in that department has to go, because the person that might own our email channel might see data from our social media channels that might influence their direction that next month. Or they can say,
Mm.
hey, we should meet offline. I didn't realize that your click-through rates doubled. That makes a lot of sense why my conversion rates doubled on my channel, because I'm benefiting from, downstream from your channels improving. But I noticed you are doing something different that I could also implement on my end. Maybe we could, in addition to doubling our click-through rate, we can also double our close win rate, right? So it's really healthy for departments. They have to go 20 minutes. Then there's 5 minutes of Q&A for anybody on the call to unmute, ask a question. It has to pertain to a data point that they talked about in their presentation. And then we have 5 minutes for what's called an action plan. And that's where usually I'm the one making the calls on that. I unmute and I say, here's what we're going to do. X, Y, Z, you're going to do this different, this different, this different. We're going to cut this budget in half. We're going to double this budget. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. So we make decisions, like big decisions on a monthly basis, that then set the direction for that particular person to own that particular channel for the next 30 days. So that also ties back into that North Star vision piece. Is if they have the core values and they know the direction that we decided to go for that channel that they own on a day-to-day, but they're getting direction, course correction. I want to go a
Yep.
little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. We're doing that on a monthly basis. That sets the tone and the direction for how they're going to manage and own that channel going forward. And that is something that I've found has dramatically accelerated growth. It increases employee happiness and success, because then they get to own it on the day-to-day. They don't feel like they're being micromanaged. They're being monthly managed. That's not a big deal at all. As long as you trust them. Of course, you have to hire great people. Like that's a given. But that's in a gist. And then this actually, in a part of the requirement, is if they have recommended changes, they have to present it in a 1-3-1 proposal within that 20 minutes. So they might spend the first 15 saying, here's the data. In the last 5 minutes, here's my 1-3-1 proposal based on what I've learned or what's changed in the last month. And then we make a decision.
Yeah, and you can see how if you layer that on top of the regular EOS or scaling up, or most of them operate on a 90-day cadence. If you layer this into that, essentially you're creating like these monthly mini rocks that potentially will hopefully lead to one of your quarterly rocks or your annual goals. I could see how that could definitely speed things up if you're in a position where you can be agile enough to operate that way. That's very cool.
And it's definitely more the scaling businesses. Like, to your point, quarterly makes a lot of sense for 50 million and higher type of organizations. But when you're going from 0 to 50, number one, you have the ability to be more agile, to your point. But secondly, you can't afford to wait 90 days. You need this decision made yesterday, and you're only 12 days into the quarter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having that monthly cadence for companies that are in that growth range, is a lot better.
Dick, well, thanks so much. It was so good to have you on, and I look forward to our next conversation.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me.